Let the world grow quiet now, dear listener. Allow your thoughts to soften, your breathing to slow, and your imagination to gently open its doors. Tonight, we return to a place of wonder where stone corridors hold ancient secrets and candlelight dances on enchanted ceilings. A place that knows your name even before you speak it. We are going back to Hogwarts. But this is not a tale of dramatic battles or grand feasts in the Great Hall. No, this is a gentler story. A story whispered between the walls. A story of lost spells, old enchantments, and the quiet kind of magic that often goes unnoticed. It is a tale of discovery, of a hidden legacy left behind by the very founders of Hogwarts themselves. Secrets buried deep within the castle's heart, waiting not for heroes, but for someone with quiet curiosity and a kind soul to find them. Our journey begins in the early days of autumn. The air is crisp, and the leaves have just begun their graceful tumble from the trees surrounding the castle grounds. The sun has dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in soft lavender hues. Lanterns glow gently in the corridors, casting warm golden light upon centuries-old stone. There's a hush across the castle, the kind that comes after a long day of lessons and laughter. Inside the library, the air is scented with parchment and polished wood. Candles flicker between tall shelves, their soft flames reflected in the glass of ancient display cases. All around, students are settling into quiet study or returning to their common rooms, their footsteps echoing faintly as they fade away. It is here, among the books and the stillness, that something begins to stir. You're invited to join this calm and curious exploration, to walk slowly through the corridors of memory and time, to listen as the castle, older than any living wizard, begins to whisper again. If this peaceful kind of adventure brings you comfort, feel free to like this tale, subscribe to hear more, and wander with us through many more quiet corners of the wizarding world. Now, let the weight of the day melt away. Nestle into your blanket, feel the softness beneath you, and allow yourself to drift toward the heart of Hogwarts. Because something very old has been waiting, and tonight it may finally be found. Let's begin. Among the many students wandering the ancient halls of Hogwarts, there was one young witch whose footsteps were always just a little quieter, a little more thoughtful than the rest. Her name was Elsie Wrenwood, a fifth-year Ravenclaw with a calm spirit and a curious heart. Elsie was the kind of girl who preferred parchment to praise, who found joy not in spectacle, but in silence. She could often be found beneath the tall windows of the library, curled near a stack of old books, scribbling gentle thoughts in her enchanted journal. Her magic wasn't loud, nor particularly flashy. It came in soft spells, whispered enchantments, and the steady glow of quiet understanding. She had chestnut brown hair, always tucked loosely behind her ears, and eyes the color of morning mist, watchful, wondering. Most people overlooked her at first, but those who sat beside her long enough would discover someone who listened closely and smiled often, someone who saw what others missed. This year, Elsie had a companion, a fellow fifth year, and her closest friend, Toby Finch, a Hufflepuff with a love for magical creatures and a habit of talking to portraits when no one was around. Toby was warm and cheerful, with sandy hair that never quite stayed in place and a laugh that filled the corners of quiet rooms. He'd once tried to befriend a grumpy old gargoyle on the astronomy tower, and when Elsie asked why, he simply said, "I think he's just lonely." Together, they made a curious pair, she, the quiet scholar, and he, the gentle chatterbox. But their friendship was easy, filled with shared glances, late-night cocoa, and quiet adventures between classes. It was Toby who had first suggested sneaking into the restricted section last year, and Elsie who had suggested, gently, that perhaps they could just ask permission instead. On this particular evening, the two friends were seated near the far end of the library, where the candles burned low and the shelves held books so old their spines whispered when touched. Elsie was leafing through a tattered history of Hogwarts' earliest days, while Toby absent-mindedly balanced a sleeping Puffskein on the table, its soft snores in rhythm with the turning pages. "Did you know," Elsie whispered, eyes scanning the text, "that the founders used spells that were never recorded in any modern book?" Toby blinked. "You mean like secret spells?" She nodded slowly. Spells that were never taught again. They were only used when Hogwarts was still new. Toby leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think they're still hidden somewhere?" Elsie didn't answer right away. She simply placed her hand gently on the old page and smiled. "I think some magic doesn't want to be found by accident. I think it waits for the right kind of person." The candles flickered around them, as if the castle itself had heard her. And deep within the oldest stones of Hogwarts, something ancient stirred, quiet, curious, ready. The hours drifted gently by in the library, as they often did in the heart of autumn. Outside, the wind rustled through golden leaves, brushing against the windows like a soft lullaby. Inside, all was quiet, just the occasional whisper of turning pages, the scratch of a quill on parchment, or the faint snore of the sleeping Puffskein resting peacefully on Toby's sleeve. Elsie Wrenwood sat very still, eyes locked on a page so faded it looked like smoke pressed into paper. The book was titled Foundations of the First Wardings of Hogwarts, its spine cracked, and its cover worn to the point where even the gilded letters had begun to vanish. It wasn't a popular read. In fact, Madame Pince had looked at her curiously when she'd asked for it. But Elsie had always been drawn to the quiet, forgotten corners of knowledge, and something about the book had tugged at her curiosity in a way she couldn't quite explain. She brushed a finger across a sentence that looked like it had been erased by time. "Toby," she said softly, her voice barely more than a breath, "come look at this." Toby stretched, blinked, and gently moved the now dozing Puffskein to the bench beside him. He leaned over Elsie's shoulder, eyes narrowing to read the blurred ink. "Is that Latin?" he asked. "No," Elsie murmured. "It's older than that. I think it's a magical dialect, one of the original forms. Look here." She pointed at a swirling pattern beneath the faded words, etched in the margins like a secret note. This isn't decorative, it's a spell rune, but it's not in any of the modern rune guides. Toby tilted his head. What does it do? I'm not sure, she replied, but I've seen something like this before, near the great staircase, carved into the wall behind the sixth pillar. I thought it was just an old builder's mark. Toby leaned back. You think it's a real spell? Something from the founders? Elsie nodded slowly, her eyes glimmering. I think we might have just found a clue. As she said the words, the air around them shifted, just slightly. A faint tingling moved through the room, like the ripple of a breeze without wind. The candle beside them flickered, its flame stretching sideways before returning to its normal flicker. They both paused. Did you feel that? Toby whispered. Elsie looked down at the page again. The swirling rune was glowing, only faintly, like the last warmth of a summer evening, but undeniably there. She didn't touch it. She didn't speak. She only watched, heart steady, as the rune seemed to breathe beneath her gaze. Then, with a slow exhale of magic, the page turned itself. Not by wind, not by accident, just turned. Toby leaned in, eyes wide. That's new. The next page had no title, no chapter heading. Only a sketch, delicate, drawn in thin brown ink. It showed a door, round, set into stone. No keyhole, no knob. Just a spiral of the same runes wrapped around its frame. Beneath the drawing, written in elegant, slanted script, was a single sentence. Only those who remember may enter. Elsie read the line aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment the words passed her lips, the book shuddered lightly in her hands. The room around them grew still, as though something was listening. I've never seen that part of the castle before, Toby said, pointing at the sketched stone. I have, Elsie said slowly. At least, I think I have. It's near the foundation level, past the potions dungeons. I saw it once during first year when we got lost chasing Peeves. Toby's eyes brightened. Then we should go see if it's still there. It's after curfew, Elsie murmured. We're fifth years. Prefects rarely check that corridor. Come on, we'll take the long cloak. The long cloak was their nickname for an enchanted piece of dark fabric they had found tucked behind a forgotten cabinet in the herbology greenhouse. It didn't quite make them invisible, but it bent light around them just enough to pass through dim corridors unnoticed, as long as they didn't breathe too loudly or sneeze. Elsie hesitated for only a moment, then carefully closed the book, whispering a soft Lumos Dormiens, which dimmed the magical rune's glow and sealed the cover with a warm pulse. 10 minutes later, they crept quietly from the library, the long cloak pulled tight around their shoulders, steps slow and careful. The castle at night was a different creature, still and listening, full of shadows and the occasional flutter of bat wings through upper windows. But it wasn't frightening. To Elsie, it felt like the castle was simply resting, waiting for morning, or perhaps waiting for them. They passed through the potions corridor, the stone walls cool and silent. At the far end, past a row of old cauldrons and dusty glass cases, they reached the place Elsie remembered. A narrow passageway, half hidden behind a cracked suit of armor, led down to a landing most students never noticed. And there it was, the door from the sketch, round, stone, seamless, just as before. Only now, it was awake. The spiral of runes along the edges glowed faintly, the same color as the mark in the book. As they approached, the center of the door shimmered, and the air around them shifted again, softly, not threatening, not urgent, but present. Elsie stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the spiral. "Only those who remember may enter," she whispered. The runes responded. They pulsed softly, once, twice. Then the center of the door melted into light, not open, just transparent, and beyond it, they saw a staircase spiraling downward, lined with shelves, scrolls, and softly glowing orbs floating lazily in the air. "I don't think this is just a room," Toby whispered. "It's a vault, a memory vault." Elsie nodded, her voice soft. "A place where the founders left their most personal spells, not for power, but for remembrance." The door, still shimmering, waited patiently. Neither of them stepped through just yet. They simply stood in awe, wrapped in warmth and wonder, knowing something rare had begun. Not something grand or world-changing, but something meant just for them. A gentle rediscovery of magic long forgotten, and now slowly returning. The light from the rune-carved doorway bathed the hallway in a soft glow, casting delicate reflections along the stone walls. It pulsed gently, steady and slow, like the rhythm of a sleeping heartbeat. The round door no longer seemed made of stone, but of something ancient and shimmering, a veil of magic folded into shape. Elsie and Toby stood just outside the threshold, cloaked in the hush of something sacred. "It doesn't feel dangerous," Toby said quietly, watching the soft glow. "Just old, like it's been asleep a very long time." Elsie nodded, eyes steady. "It's waiting, not hiding. That's different." She took a slow breath, then stepped forward through the arch. The moment her foot touched the floor beyond, the veil-like surface of the door rippled gently around her like water, not resisting, but acknowledging. Toby followed closely behind, careful to match her pace. The shimmer clung behind them without a sound, leaving the corridor as silent as before. Inside was a spiral stairway, just like the sketch had shown, only now every step seemed carved from polished wood and stone, with the grain and texture of something impossibly old. Glowing orbs floated near the ceiling, drifting lazily as if in a slow, enchanted dream. Each orb flickered with soft color, amber, blue, pale green, as though responding to the magic in the air. The stairwell was quiet, but not empty. There was a presence, nothing frightening, nothing cold, but something aware, the way a forest feels when the wind stops moving, or a library feels in the deep hours of the night. Listening, remembering, Toby reached out to one of the orbs. It drifted slightly closer, but didn't touch him. Inside, he could see tiny patterns swirling, images that faded before they could form completely. Faces, perhaps, or rooms, or spells. "They're memories," Elsie whispered, "pieces of something left behind." As they descended slowly, the orbs followed, drifting beside them like quiet companions. At the bottom of the staircase, the path opened into a wide, circular chamber. It was warm here, but not from fire. The air shimmered with an energy so gentle it felt like a soft woolen shawl wrapped around the shoulders. The room was lined with shelves carved directly into the stone, each one filled with scrolls bound in silk, old wands sealed in glass, and delicate items that pulsed faintly with old magic. In the center stood a pedestal made of intertwining wood and silver, and upon it lay a single open book, its pages blank, or so it seemed at first. Elsie approached slowly. As she neared, faint lines began to appear on the page, blooming softly, like morning mist. Words formed, not all at once, but gently, line by line, as if the book was writing itself in response to her presence. She leaned closer, reading aloud in a hushed voice. When the four first laid stone upon stone, they carved more than castle, they carved memory, not for power, not for legacy, but for those who would listen. Toby stared at the page, the words reflecting softly in his eyes. It's a message from the founders. Elsie nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of the parchment, and it's still listening. As she spoke, a gentle hum filled the air, like distant music played on invisible strings. It wasn't loud or urgent. It felt like a call, but one that waited patiently to be heard. The floating orbs shifted in rhythm, as if the room itself had taken a slow, deep breath. Then something extraordinary happened. The stone beneath their feet shimmered, revealing faint patterns, circles, sigils, and markings that had remained hidden until now. Slowly, one of the shelves along the far wall began to glow. On it rested 4 scrolls, each one tied with a ribbon of a different color: scarlet, green, blue, and gold. Elsie and Toby approached the shelf cautiously. The scrolls pulsed softly, the way a sleeping creature might stir at the sound of its name. "There's one for each founder," Toby whispered. Elsie reached for the blue-ribboned scroll first. It unrolled gently in her hand, the parchment smooth and surprisingly warm. The writing was delicate, written in ink that shifted colors as it moved. "It's Rowena Ravenclaw's spell," she murmured. She read aloud a portion of it, just a few lines. The spell wasn't flashy. It didn't summon fire or transfigure objects. It was a spell for uncovering truth and memories. A gentle spell, one meant for quiet minds and careful hearts. One that let a wizard walk through their own past and find what had been forgotten. Toby picked up the scroll with the gold ribbon. This must be Godric Gryffindor's. He opened it slowly and read a few lines under his breath. His eyes widened slightly. "It's a protection spell, not a shield. Something different. It hides bravery in others. Cast it on someone else, and it helps them find the courage already inside them, like lighting a lantern." They exchanged a look, calm but full of wonder. These weren't spells for show. They were deeply personal, meant to be passed quietly, not taught in classrooms or shouted in duels. They turned their attention to the other 2 scrolls, still resting on the shelf, green for Salazar Slytherin and scarlet for Helga Hufflepuff. But as they reached forward, something stirred in the air. Not a warning, more like a pause, a hush. Elsie pulled her hand back gently. "I don't think we're meant to open those yet. Toby nodded slowly. Maybe not until we understand the first two. The room didn't disagree. The glow around the remaining scrolls faded softly, and the musical hum settled into a low, steady vibration. As they looked around once more, they noticed that more orbs had begun to drift in from hidden corners, glowing just slightly brighter now. One of them floated gently toward Toby, hovered for a moment, and then unfolded. Inside the orb, a clear memory played, not from their lives, but from long ago. It showed a younger version of Helga Hufflepuff, standing in a garden filled with magical herbs, whispering to a student who looked unsure, frightened. She cast no spell, she simply listened. And as she listened, the student's posture shifted, the fear faded, the light returned to their eyes. Then the orb gently closed again, drifting back into the air. Toby's voice was quiet. She didn't need a spell, just kindness. Elsie smiled. Some magic doesn't live in wands. They stood in stillness for a while, surrounded by memories too soft to be told in books, too sacred to be spoken aloud. And when the pedestal closed its book once more, the glow in the room faded gently, as if tucking itself back in for sleep. They turned slowly and began to ascend the spiral stairs again, this time with no hurry. Each step hummed faintly beneath them, as if the castle itself remembered their presence and was quietly grateful. When they stepped back through the rune-lit door, the passage behind them sealed with a soft shimmer, returning the wall to stillness once more. But the memory had been shared, and something within Hogwarts had awakened, not loudly, not suddenly, just enough for those who remembered to listen. The door faded behind them like a sigh, its warm shimmer settling once again into the silent stone. The hallway was unchanged, quiet, untouched, just as it had been before the two friends stepped through. Yet to Elsie and Toby, everything felt different now, as though the walls of the castle had shifted slightly, just enough to let them in on a secret that had waited centuries to be seen. They stood in the dim corridor for a while, not speaking. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full of gentle thought, like the hush in a library just before a new discovery. Each of them carried something now, though no spell had marked them. It was the kind of knowing that changes how you walk through the world. Slowly, carefully, they turned and began their way back through the castle. It was past curfew now, but neither of them felt nervous. The castle at night had a still rhythm, like a great creature sleeping peacefully around them. Candles flickered gently in their sconces, and the air was laced with that familiar, comforting scent. Wax, parchment, and something faintly floral from the enchanted cleaning charms. As they turned a corner near the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, Toby paused. "Elsie, did you hear that?" She stopped beside him, listening. It wasn't loud, a faint chime, like glass catching the wind, very soft, very distant. They followed it carefully. The sound came again, closer now, not a warning, not unsettling, just out of place, a curious sound, like a whisper calling from another room. As they moved along the corridor, they noticed something they hadn't seen before, a thin trail of golden dust drifting just above the stone floor, as though something magical had recently passed this way and left a trace behind. The trail led to an old wooden door they both recognized. It was one of the old disused classrooms, long abandoned since the early days of the castle. They had passed it dozens of times without a second glance, but tonight the door was slightly ajar. Elsie looked to Toby, who gave a small nod. She pushed the door open gently, the hinges creaking softly. Inside, the room was aglow with a faint golden light, warm and quiet. Dust floated like snow in the air, undisturbed. The desks had long been stacked against the walls, and an old blackboard stood crooked at the far end. But in the center of the room, resting atop a small wooden pedestal that hadn't been there before, sat a small hourglass. It wasn't ordinary. The sand inside shimmered as it fell, slow and glowing, and etched along its base were runes that matched those they had seen on the scrolls below. Toby stepped forward, his voice low. "Another spell?" Elsie approached slowly, leaning just close enough to examine the markings. "I think it's connected to time, but not how we usually understand it. It's not turning time back or forward." She paused, watching the delicate fall of the sand. "I think it reveals moments that are easily forgotten." Toby tilted his head. "Like memories?" "No, more like feelings. Fleeting things, the kinds of moments people experience then let go because they're too small to hold. But magic doesn't forget them." As she finished speaking, the hourglass pulsed and the room changed, not dramatically. No walls fell, no wind rushed through, but gently, like turning the page of a book and finding a memory nestled between. For just a moment, the classroom filled with quiet echoes. A young student sitting near the window, nervously clutching a wand, an old professor smiling gently as she offered reassurance. A moment of calm, so brief it might never have been remembered except by the hourglass. Then it faded again. Elsie looked at Toby. "This is a founder's spell. I'm sure of it." He nodded, watching the hourglass. "It's like a magical memory keeper, not of events, but of emotions." They sat beside the pedestal for a while, saying very little. The hourglass continued to flow, each grain of shimmering sand carrying something delicate, something worth remembering. There was something profoundly peaceful about the room, as though the magic had been cast not for utility, but for kindness, to preserve something that mattered only to the heart. Eventually, they rose and left the classroom as they had found it. The door closed softly behind them. As they wandered further through the castle, they noticed more golden traces, faint, like the light of a setting sun resting along the edges of banisters and walls. Not every hallway held them, only the oldest parts of the castle, the places the founders had walked. The next trail led them toward the greenhouse annex, a place that hadn't been used in years. The windows were fogged from age, and vines had crept in around the edges. But the door stood slightly ajar, the trail curling inward like an invitation. Inside, the greenhouse smelled of earth and rain. Moonlight poured through the glass ceiling in soft beams, falling upon the plants that still thrived quietly, untouched by lessons or schedules. And at the center of the greenhouse stood something unexpected. A tree, small, glowing softly, Its leaves shimmered with hues of silver and gold. Toby gasped. Elsie, is that enchanted? She stepped closer. It's more than enchanted. I think it's alive with the Founder's magic. Resting at the base of the tree was another scroll tied in green ribbon. The final one. Elsie bent down and picked it up, the silk ribbon falling away at her touch. This scroll was different. The ink shimmered in shades of emerald, and the spell within was one of understanding. It wasn't a charm or a potion or an enchantment to protect or transform. It was a spell of perception, meant to help the caster see the world not as it is, but as others feel it, to sense intentions, to recognize hidden pain, to perceive not with the eyes, but with the heart. Elsie read the first line aloud, softly. To walk in another's shadow is to see the light they leave behind. As she finished, the greenhouse pulsed with soft light. The tree shimmered, then gently dimmed, returning to its quiet slumber. The scroll glowed for a moment in Elsie's hands before sealing itself again. Neither she nor Toby spoke for a while. Then he whispered, Slytherin left this? She nodded. Maybe he wanted to be understood, too. They left the greenhouse, the scroll safely cradled in Elsie's arms. The castle no longer felt filled with secrets, but with stories, soft ones, left behind by people who knew that magic wasn't only about power, but about meaning. They had discovered something sacred, not hidden to protect, but to remember. The castle, in its quietest hours, seemed to breathe with them now. No longer just stone and staircase, it felt alive, as if, through their discoveries, Hogwarts had grown more aware of them, too. Elsie and Toby moved through its ancient halls with reverence, carrying 3 of the Founder's forgotten spells, each one a gentle echo of a time long past. Yet one scroll still remained unopened, Helga Hufflepuff's. As they stood beneath the soft light of the floating staircases, the final scroll gently tucked into Elsie's satchel, they exchanged a glance that didn't need words. It was time. I don't think this one will be hidden, Elsie said softly. Helga's magic. It feels different, open. Toby nodded. So where would something welcoming want to be found? They paused, then together they spoke the answer in unison. The kitchens. The Hufflepuff common room was near the kitchens, but the entrance to the great underground chamber where food was prepared was known to a few students in each house, usually passed on in whispers and traditions. Toby had been shown during his first year by a laughing 7th year who had promised him pastries in return for helping clean cauldron bottoms. He remembered the trick, tickling the pear in the painting of the fruit bowl, with careful steps and candlelit shadows stretching beside them. They moved through the lower levels of the castle. It was near midnight now, but there was no rush in their steps. The air was cool, laced with the faint scent of sugar and stone. When they reached the painting, Toby stepped forward and gave the small, green pear a gentle tickle. It giggled and turned into a doorknob. With a warm click, the door swung open. Inside, the kitchen was warm, full of soft clinking sounds, from enchanted pots slowly scrubbing themselves and loaves of bread that rose gently in ovens enchanted with timers only house elves could hear. The glow of the hearth bathed the room in gold, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted nuts drifted like a lullaby. "Do you feel it?" Elsie whispered. Toby closed his eyes. "Yeah, like this room is smiling." They walked toward the back of the kitchen, where a small wooden table stood, empty but polished. Upon it sat a parchment, neatly folded, wrapped in soft yellow ribbon. Elsie stepped forward, her fingers trembling just slightly as she untied it. The scroll opened slowly, lines forming as though ink still flowed freshly through the quill that had written it. There was no grand preface, no long introduction, only this: magic given in kindness never fades. This spell is not for casting, it is for doing. Beneath the words, no incantation followed, no wand movement diagram, just a symbol, a simple spiral wrapped in ivy, drawn in golden ink. Elsie tilted her head. "It's not a spell at all." Toby studied the parchment beside her, or maybe it's a reminder. The scroll shimmered, and in that moment, a memory unfolded, not in the air, not in an orb, but within them. It was as if the warmth of a hand on your shoulder, the feeling of someone sitting beside you when you felt small, bloomed in the space between them. The scroll seemed to radiate the feeling of belonging. "I think Helga left this," Elsie said quietly, "because not all magic is meant to be learned. Some is meant to be lived." Toby smiled. "Makes sense. She built her house around fairness and kindness. Her magic wasn't hidden, it was shared." They stayed in the kitchen for a while, sipping gently steaming cocoa left by invisible hands, resting beneath the slow-turning ceiling fans, the scroll softly glowing beside them. It was the most peaceful moment of the night, filled not with awe, but with comfort. And sometimes, comfort is the rarest magic of all. Later, they returned to the library, not to hide the scrolls, but to place them where they belonged. The quiet section at the back, where books lived that hadn't been read in decades, held a display case that rarely drew attention. Elsie unlocked it with a soft flick of her wand. Inside were empty velvet slots, 4 of them, meant for documents long since lost. One by one, they returned the scrolls. The blue, the gold, the green, and last, the yellow. Each one glowed softly as it touched the velvet, sealing itself with a gentle hum. The case shimmered, then fell still. "Do you think anyone else will find them?" Toby asked. Elsie smiled. "I hope so, but only when they're ready to see them, like we were." They turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the library. Elsie glanced back once, her heart quiet, her mind at ease. The scrolls had not given them power or fame or answers to any exam. They had offered something far more lasting, a way of seeing, a way of remembering, a way of being magical softly. And with that, they walked back into the warmth of the castle corridors, 2 friends, still wrapped in the quiet glow of spells meant not to dazzle but to comfort, just as the founders had intended. The castle's soft, enchanted hush welcomed them as they stepped out of the library and into the hallway beyond. Something had shifted, not in any physical way, but in how the castle felt around them. It no longer seemed like a place full of mysteries to uncover. It felt aware, present, as though Hogwarts itself had watched their journey, page by page, step by step, and now it was gently preparing to reveal its final truth. Elsie and Toby walked side by side in comfortable silence, the gentle tap of their shoes the only sound. The warmth of the kitchen still lingered in their hearts, and the echoes of ancient magic, soft, subtle, enduring, rested quietly in their thoughts. But even in that peace, something gentle stirred, a question not quite answered. "Do you feel like we're missing something?" Toby asked, eyes still scanning the stone walls as they turned a familiar corner near the charms corridor. Elsie paused, her brows knitting slightly. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." They both stopped walking. The corridor around them was still and familiar, yet somehow different. The torches flickered softly on the walls, and in the stillness of that moment, a draft stirred, cool and scented faintly with ancient parchment and lavender. It led them toward a door neither of them had truly noticed before. It had always been there, plain and wooden, nestled between two mismatched stone columns. But tonight, it held a glimmer at its edges, as if someone had drawn a very thin line of starlight around the frame. Without a word, Elsie stepped forward and placed her hand on the door. It opened without resistance. Inside, the room was small, circular. The walls were lined with mirrors, not large ones, but many small ones, each about the size of a spell book. They shimmered gently, reflecting not the room, but soft images that danced just beyond recognition. In the center of the room stood a single chair, carved from deep walnut wood and draped in velvet. Elsie and Toby entered slowly, their footsteps muffled by the smooth stone beneath them. As they stepped further inside, the mirrors began to shift. They showed moments, not of the past, but of the present. Of them, Elsie, reading by the window of the Ravenclaw common room, her brow furrowed in concentration. Toby helping a first year find her class, carrying her books when she dropped them. Elsie pausing to mend a broken quill for another student, not because she had to, but because she noticed. Toby sharing a joke with a shy boy who rarely spoke. Small things, quiet things. Gentle magic lived, not cast. And then the mirrors shimmered again. Now they showed flashes of other students. Some they recognized, some they didn't, each captured in moments of quiet kindness. A Slytherin girl giving up her seat in class. A Gryffindor boy who held back laughter when a spell went wrong. A Hufflepuff held in the greenhouse long after class ended. A Ravenclaw placing a bookmark in a library book before returning it, knowing someone else would appreciate it. Toby's voice was a whisper. "It's not just us." Elsie stepped to the center of the room, the velvet chair behind her, the mirrors surrounding them in a slow, quiet dance. "No," she said softly. "The founders left magic behind, but not to be admired. They left it so people would remember who they were, not just what they taught." The air shimmered gently around them, and from the ceiling, a soft golden light began to fall like dust. It hovered, weightless, forming a spiral above them, slowly revealing a shape. A tapestry, it unfurled without sound, and on it, the crest of Hogwarts gleamed stitched in silver and gold. But around it were unfamiliar markings, names, dates, moments, not great victories or magical breakthroughs, but simple inscriptions. Alandra Moore, Hufflepuff, shared her cloak with a crying classmate, 1823. Callum Reed, Gryffindor, waited with a lost first year until help arrived, 1979. Elsie Renwood and Toby Finch returned the Founders' spells with care and understanding, 2024. The tapestry glowed faintly as the light drifted across it. It's not a record of power, Elsie murmured. It's a memory of the school's heart. The final revelation didn't come with a flash or flourish. It came with a quiet understanding, a warmth that grew from within. The Founders' magic had never been lost. It had been living all along in the students who acted with kindness, with empathy, with curiosity. The scrolls, the vault, the enchanted objects, these were gentle reminders, invitations to see the magic that exists in everyday choices, spells of courage, of compassion, of connection. And now, the castle had shared its deepest truth. Toby turned toward her. "We didn't just find forgotten spells," he said. "We remembered what it means to be part of this place." Elsie smiled, her eyes bright. And maybe that was the magic all along. As the light gently dimmed, the mirrors shimmered once more, and the door opened on its own. They stepped out into the corridor as though waking from a long, beautiful dream. And behind them, the room faded from view, not erased, but simply waiting for the next ones who might wander with curious hearts, for the next gentle magic to be remembered. The castle was utterly still as Elsie and Toby stepped quietly into the corridor once more, the soft click of the closing door fading behind them like a final punctuation mark on a long-forgotten chapter. The air was warmer now, not from temperature, but from something else, something deeper. A presence that wrapped around them like a woolen shawl on a winter morning. They didn't rush. Their footsteps were slow, steady, and unhurried, echoing faintly in the quiet halls. It was nearing dawn, and the first hints of soft golden light had begun to rise, filtering in through the high windows like sleepy promises. The castle, once a place filled with mysteries and shadows, now felt like home in a different way, as if it had acknowledged them gently and gratefully. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was no need. Their silence wasn't empty, but full of knowing, like two pages that had finally found their place in the same book. As they passed through the familiar halls of the Ravenclaw Tower, the spiral staircase lit up ahead of them as though the castle was lighting their way back. When they reached the common room door, Elsie paused and glanced out through one of the nearby arched windows. Far below, the lake was still and silver, a quiet mirror of the morning sky. The forbidden forest stirred with the hush of creatures waking slowly. All of Hogwarts seemed to be breathing softly with them. She turned to Toby, who smiled sleepily and leaned against the cool stone wall. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he whispered. Elsie nodded. "It feels peaceful, like the castle's dreams have been restored." Toby yawned gently, rubbing his eyes. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" "Maybe not," she replied, her voice warm and calm. "But I don't think we were meant to tell everyone. I think we were just meant to remember. Toby gave a small laugh. We're definitely going to remember, especially the part where we snuck into an ancient memory vault and discovered hidden spells of the four founders. Elsie chuckled softly, her hand resting over her satchel where the velvet bookmarks, gifts from the scrolls, rested quietly. Each of them had been left with something to carry, not trophies or treasures, but reminders. Gentle ones, symbols of magic, not meant to be brandished, but lived. I think the founders would have liked that, she said. Quiet magic, the kind that makes people feel seen. They made their way through the final stairwell, the stones warmed by morning light. The portraits along the way stirred from their frames, offering sleepy nods and faint greetings. The castle felt content. Back in the common room, Elsie slipped into her favorite window seat, where the sun touched the cushions and the pages of her books always seemed to glow just a little brighter. Toby sat beside her, head tilted back against the glass, already half drifting into a nap. A few students passed through, murmuring good mornings and giving them sleepy waves. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. And yet, everything had changed. They had uncovered something ancient, not buried in darkness, but resting in warmth, waiting to be remembered by those who would treat it gently. The scrolls, the orbs, the hourglass, the tree, every piece of the founder's legacy had led them not toward power, but toward presence, toward noticing, toward caring. As the sun rose higher, Elsie opened her enchanted journal and began to write, not to document everything, not to retell each detail, but simply to record how she felt, grateful, awake, home. And far below the castle's floors, deep beneath the stones and scrolls, the silent magic of Hogwarts exhaled, rested, reassured, and ready to wait again. And now, dear listener, the sun has risen gently over the towers of Hogwarts, brushing its golden fingers across ancient stone and ivy-covered walls. The castle is waking once again. The classrooms will soon fill with laughter. The staircases will creak with motion, and books will flutter open as curious minds gather once more. But before the day begins, in these last few quiet moments, let your thoughts rest in the warmth of what we've shared. You've journeyed through silent corridors and hidden chambers, uncovered spells not of thunder or fire, but of courage, compassion, memory, and heart. You've walked with two friends who didn't seek greatness, but found something greater down in glory. Gentle magic left behind for those who still believe that kindness, wonder, and quiet bravery are worth remembering. The founders of Hogwarts, in all their wisdom, gave the world more than sorting hats and enchanted ceilings. They left behind echoes of their true selves, pieces of who they were, wrapped softly in spells meant not to be shouted, but to be felt. And now, that magic lives in you, in the way you listen, in the way you notice, in the way you move through the world with care. So, close your eyes now. Let the castle's calm lull you to sleep. Let the memory of glowing scrolls and gentle spells drift around you like a soft cloak. You are safe here, in the quiet magic between stories, in the hush between the turning pages. The journey may be ending, But the magic, oh, the magic remains, not in distant towers or secret vaults, but within you, quiet, patient, and everlasting. So rest easy now, dear dreamer. You have remembered something important. And Hogwarts remembers you too. Good night.